Okay, welcome everybody. If you could come in and take your seats and take your coffee with you. It's very nice to have you. So let me continue the conference, say a few introductory remarks again, some housekeeping topics. It really is an honor to have this conference every year. We are celebrating the mission of the university, the spirited mission, part of which is to honor and support the integrity of creation. That's the general theme of our conference, and each year we have a different topic. The topic of the first conference was the climate change, and you see the book of the first conference, the conference proceedings, is available at the back of the room and outside. The second conference last year on ecology, that book is being published as we speak. It will be out in a few months' time, so that will be available again next year. And then the speakers at our conference this year, we're going to collate them into another wonderful book. And that's a very important part of our work, that the conference yields a very high quality, it's called a peer-reviewed, reviewed by peers, high quality academic publication. These are not just prominent people, as I've said, these are the movers and shakers of this debate nationally and internationally. Now also we have in this room next door several displays, and over the lunchtime when we're having lunch you'll be going out and picking up your lunch and come back and eat your lunch here at the tables. These people are going to have just 1 or 2 minutes at the podium. They'll be able to say a little bit about their work. But there are some really very interesting displays on this side of the atrium, so I do encourage you during the breaks and over lunch to have a look at that. Well, indeed, the global water crisis is a global crisis, and we are ever so thrilled, indeed very honored to have a speaker about a very significant international component of this debate. And to introduce our next speaker, I'm going to ask another professor from our university who's on our committee, a great scientist, John Stoltz, to introduce our speaker. Thank you.
Thank you, Jerry. And again, welcome back. I'm Dr. John Stoltz. I am the director of our Center for Environmental Research and Education. And as part of that, we have a number of projects that deal directly with water. We've had an ongoing water quality study now going on for over 5 years, in which we're going out and sampling well water and surface water throughout this area, seeing how the water quality is. And we also have the 3RQ project, which is monitoring the 3 rivers, and you can learn more about 3RQ. They have a couple of posters next door. But right now, it's a pleasure for me to introduce Dr. Hussein Amery from the Colorado School of Mines. Dr. Amery received his BA in Geography from the University of Calgary, and Master's also in Geography from the Wilfrid Laurier University, and a PhD also in Geography from McMaster University. He currently is an Associate Professor of International Studies at Colorado School of Mines, and also has served a number of positions at that university, including as Associate Provost and as the Director of his department. He currently is a Fellow of the International Water Association and on the editorial board of the Arab World Geographer. He has authored 1 book that was published in 2015 and co-authored a 2nd book on water in the Middle East, and is a world-recognized leader in the same topic. Today, Dr. Amery will present on the water, food, energy nexus in the Middle East. Dr. Amery.
Good morning. Thank you for the introduction. It's an honor and a pleasure to be with you, and I'm particularly thankful for Jerry and all those who contributed to putting this wonderful conference together. The integrity of creation is something that draws on a key religious concept of creation care, caring for our common home, as the Pope has mentioned, and it's a theme that unites religious communities. It's a theme that draws on our common humanity, on our common theological principles that will help in uniting our communities into doing the right thing and preserving the natural environment. The topic that I will be addressing today is water, food, energy nexus in the Middle East, a focus on Saudi Arabia. I would like to start off by referencing an idea that was raised at the World Economic Forum, where the organizers of that conference asked leaders and experts in the Middle East about issues that their region, the Middle East and North Africa, what issues is your region least prepared for? And those experts said that the water crisis is that issue. They put that ahead of unemployment and political instability. So water crisis is a real issue that is a huge concern to leaders and experts in the Middle East, and it's, as we've heard today and last night, it's also a global crisis. So my talk today is an extension of the ideas that I've put together in a book that was published a couple of years ago, Arab Water Security, which is primarily focused on the question of what are the national security implications of the Gulf states' reliance on desalination technology. So by way of an overview, Saudi Arabia is an oil-rich country, but it's also very poor in terms of water supply and in terms of food production, its ability to produce food. The nexus approach, which is, like I said, an extension of the ideas of my book, a nexus approach clarifies national security linkages between water, food, and energy. And the reliance of the Gulf states on oil and gas to desalinate is unsustainable, is one of the arguments that I'm making in this presentation. And the mitigation measures for Saudi Arabia and other Gulf states, mitigation measures should include integrated planning in the areas of water, energy, and food. In 2012, the intelligence agencies in the US came out with a report about the overarching future megatrends that will shape the world into 2030. And they, among other things, they talked about the growing nexus among food, water, energy in combination with climate change. So that is seen by the intelligence communities as one of the overarching issues that is of concern to them and of the world. And this graphic draws together the how water, food, and energy are linked. We clearly need water for cooling, for example, in the production of energy. We need water for energy. We need water to produce biofuels. And needless to say, we need a lot of water to produce food. The vast majority of fresh water that we consume as human beings goes to the production of food. Something like 70% of all the water that we consume, all the fresh water we consume goes to the production of food. And in drier areas, like the Gulf states, a lot more water, something like 85% of the fresh water used there goes to the production of food. So the food energy nexus can be easily seen in this graph which shows how food and oil prices move in parallel. They're closely related. When we look at water in the Arab world, we see that the vast majority of countries in the Arab world are deep in the severe water scarcity level, especially the Gulf states. Especially the Gulf states of the Middle Eastern countries that have surplus water, that are not in the severe water scarcity zone. Lebanon is one, and Turkey. Turkey is not on the graph, but is it? So Lebanon and Turkey are countries that have more water, that are not in the severe water scarcity zone. The Gulf states are deep in that zone, and they've been making it up. They've been supplementing what little water that they have by desalination, an issue that I'll be coming back to in a few minutes. So this aerial photograph captures quite nicely and vividly the fact that this region is extremely water scarce, and despite the fact that it's very rich in energy. Incidentally, as I cannot point to it. Is there
Maybe the top one?
the top one?
Not at me.
Oh, there we go. Okay. Okay. So, so the Tigris and Euphrates are up here, and the Jordan River is roughly over here. So south of this area, south of this crescent, if you like, the entire region from here all the way down to Yemen and Oman, that entire massive piece of real estate doesn't have a single permanently running river. So what they have is some aquifers, and the vast majority of aquifers are non-renewable. So like I said earlier, the vast majority of food, the vast majority of water that we consume goes towards the production of food, and by far the most water-intensive food that we eat is beef, or those juicy beef steaks that a lot of us enjoy, and it takes something like 15,000 liters of water to produce 1 gallon, 1 kilogram of food. Is this half a liter? This is half a liter, so it takes, I guess, 30,000 of these to produce 2 pounds of meat, of beef. And as societies, like in the Gulf states, as societies become rich, their diet changes. The traditional diet in the Gulf states is one that was based on primarily grains, on lentils, on hummus. Hummus is Arabic for garbanzo beans. And so that diet has been changing towards the consumption of a lot more beef, and it takes a heck of a lot less water to produce the same weight of in vegetables. So it takes 300 liters of water to produce 2 pounds of vegetables, and 1,500 liters of water to produce 2 pounds of wheat. So by way of an overview of Saudi Arabia, it has relatively rapid population growth rate, which is 2.5% per year. Most groundwater that's available in Saudi Arabia is water that is brackish, that is salty, that requires some filtration to be made potable. Some filtration means some energy that needs to be applied, and some cost that is applied so to make it potable. In 1991, there was a study that used 1980 data. So we're talking about a pretty old study that said that annual withdrawals of groundwater are far in excess of natural recharge in Saudi Arabia. This was a long time ago, and the situation has gotten a lot worse. Rainfall is low and irregular, and that makes it that much harder to manage water supply. Rainfall ranges from something like 100 millimeters per year to, in a couple of spots in the southeast, to something like 500 millimeters per year. Rainfall in Riyadh can fluctuate in the country, and including in Riyadh, can fluctuate immensely. And as, like I said earlier, as society has become richer, and the Gulf states, including Saudi Arabia, have become significantly richer in the last 40, 50 years, meat consumption, protein consumption has gone way up. As you can see from the statistics on the screen, today meat consumption in Saudi Arabia is something like 273 calories in 2011, which is on par with the global average consumption. But in terms of the rate of change, it's huge. So one of the solutions, well, pretty much the only solution for the Gulf states is desalination. Of course, conservation, as we heard Robert say in the previous presentation, conservation and other signals and other measures are pretty important in terms of how strategies to manage our water supply. But in the Gulf states, the fact of the matter is they have extreme scarcity that they need to supplement what they have, and the only way of supplementing what they have is through desalination. Desalination is in fact an old idea that goes back to Aristotle. Aristotle wrote about evaporation and condensation. The world has something like 21,000 desalination plants. The largest plants in the world are in the Middle East. The largest plant, I think, currently, in terms of output, is in Saudi Arabia. It opened about a year ago, and approximately 60% of all desalination capacity is found in the Middle East. Despite that, less than 1% of the world's population currently depend on desalination of desalinated seawater. The problem with desalination, one of the problems with desalination was talked about in the previous presentation, and that is the brine that is produced from the desalination process. So you take a certain volume of water from the sea, you desalinate it, and 50% or you get roughly 50% fresh water from the water that you draw from the sea, and the concentrated brine that is left over is often dealt with in ecologically poor ways, in ecologically destructive ways. Sometimes it's dumped into the desert, sometimes it's mixed in with seawater and put back into the Persian Gulf. The Persian Gulf, incidentally, is obviously connected to the Indian Ocean, but in many, many respects, the Persian Gulf is essentially a closed lake because at the Strait of Hormuz, the connection point between the Gulf and the Indian Ocean, the Strait of Hormuz is rather narrow. So for the Gulf to flush itself, the waters in the Gulf to flush themselves completely, it takes something like 85 years. So the other problem or the other challenge with desalination is the fact that it's very energy intensive. It takes a lot of energy to produce a cubic meter of fresh water, and the key economic the key source of foreign income for Saudi Arabia comes from the export of oil, and a study by the Center for Strategic International Studies found that with business as usual in Saudi Arabia, in something like 15 or 20 years, the country will not be able to export any oil because they'd be using all their oil for domestic purposes, including desalination, including air conditioning needs, and the very high oil and electricity consumption that they have in the country. And that would obviously pose a significant economic burden or hardship on the economy of Saudi Arabia. So that is unacceptable just from a practical point of view, if not an environmental point of view. So demand for oil and gas is growing at 7% a year. And the need for desalinated water is also growing at a pretty fast rate. This map illustrates clearly the heavy concentration of desalination plants in the Middle East. So some of the other challenges or problems that come with the reliance on desalination is the fact that there are hazards or threats to desalination plants, and some of the threats to desalination plants come from natural sources. So as you can see here, all these dots indicate the heavy concentration of desalination plants on the Arab side, if you like, of the Persian Gulf. And so all these plants draw salt water from the Gulf and turn it into fresh water. But in the Iran side, roughly where the eye is, you have a nuclear power plant. So if something was to happen to that nuclear power plant, if you were to have radioactive spill into the Gulf, you could have, that could significantly threaten water intake into these desalination plants. Also, this side of the Gulf, right along there, this side of the Gulf is an earthquake active zone. And you mix that with the fact that you have a nuclear plant is not a happy scenario for people on the other side of the Gulf who are heavily dependent on the water from desalination. So there are two primary technologies that are dominant in the world in the area of desalination. One is reverse osmosis, and the other is thermal desalination. And reverse osmosis is essentially becoming more popular primarily because it's energy efficient. And I mentioned earlier that desalination is an extremely energy-intensive process. And here's a breakdown of the cost structure of reverse osmosis desalination plants. We see that the electrical energy is roughly 44% of the cost of maintaining that plant, and it's more energy efficient than other technologies. So these pie charts show the water consumption in Bahrain. Saudi Arabia is the middle pie chart, and Oman is the one on the right. And we see that the green indicates the volume or the amount of water that's used in agriculture. And we see that the vast majority of water consumed in the Gulf states, especially in Saudi Arabia, goes towards the production of food. So in this extremely arid region, they're consuming up to 85% of their freshwater supply on the production of food. So grain production in the Middle East and North Africa has been leveling off while consumption continues to skyrocket. So the gap between production and consumption has been growing over the years. Egypt is said to import in wheat the equivalent of the flow of the Nile every year. And that's related to the concept of virtual water, which is the water that's embedded in the production of anything that we consume, including food. So grain and meat have an embedded water component in it, in them, and that is referred to as virtual water. So this is a strange-looking graph, partly because of the massive fluctuation of wheat production in Saudi Arabia. So we notice in this graph that up until about 1980, wheat production in Saudi Arabia was almost non-existent. And then after that, it skyrockets. So what happened is the following. In 1973, there was an Arab oil embargo on the West, and Henry Kissinger visits King Faisal at the time and said to him, "My dear king," this is during the embargo, the oil embargo, "My dear king, it's good for you to remember that your country is heavily dependent on food imports." Hint, hint, we could just as easily impose a food embargo on you, and shortly after that, it took the government a few years to get a policy in place, and from 1980 onwards, the Saudi Arabian government embraced a policy of wheat self-sufficiency or food self-sufficiency, primarily focused on wheat production. And the only way you can do this in a country like Saudi Arabia with the climate of Saudi Arabia is to heavily subsidize the production of wheat, and that's exactly what they did. They produced so much wheat that in the early 1990s, Saudi Arabia became a net exporter of wheat. That sounds like an amazing feat, and I'll say some more in a couple of minutes. So what happened is in 2008, the government of Saudi Arabia looked around and discovered that they had decimated their aquifers. They have overpumped their aquifers, and their aquifers are, the vast majority of their aquifers are non-renewable, meaning this resource that is so scarce, they have used it to produce an extremely cheap commodity that is wheat. Wheat is one of the cheaper commodities that you can buy on the international market, and so they reversed course. As of 2008, the Saudi Arabian government introduced a new policy that phased out subsidy for wheat, and that phased out subsidy came to, it was phased from 2008 till 2016. So last year was the last period of any subsidy for wheat in Saudi Arabia, and that explains the significant drop in the graph in the wheat production. So it's, remember what I said earlier, that the peninsula is extremely water scarce, so any wheat that is produced in that peninsula, including Saudi Arabia, is completely irrigated. So there is no such thing as rain-fed wheat production. There is and there is a significant, as you can see from the longer quote, there's a significant economic cost to the production of wheat, and there's a significant environmental or hydrological cost to the production of wheat. It takes a lot more water to produce wheat in the desert than it does, say, in Ohio or in Pennsylvania. Saudi Arabian government spent something like $85 billion on subsidies for wheat to wheat farmers from 1980 to 2005. And part of the social contract that Saudi Arabia has with its citizens is that I, the government, will take care of you, the citizen, extremely well as long as you buy into the political system that I have provided for you. So part of the taking care of you, the citizen, means that I'll subsidize a lot of the services that you need on a daily or regular basis. So Saudi citizens pay nothing to very little for water, and pay extremely low prices for energy, and next to nothing for healthcare, or very heavily subsidized healthcare services and what have you. So that is part of the social contract in Saudi Arabia, when oil prices dropped about 3 years ago, Saudi Arabia began to change its mind, and they began to increase, they began to reduce their subsidies for some of these services. Domestic water consumption in Saudi Arabia is, depending on the source that you look at, is rising by anywhere from 6% a year to 8.8% a year, which is massive. And part of the reason why there's a significant rise in water consumption has to do with the fact that it's almost a free resource in that country. What is odd here is you would think that market economics should, I mean, we're taught in Economics 101 that supply and demand and that people are rational economic actors. So under conditions of scarcity, the resource should cost a lot more, while in fact the opposite is true. Like I said, this picture as of 3 years ago has begun to change to some extent. And a Saudi minister said recently that water consumption in the very high water consumption in Saudi Arabia, he described it as frightening. So the message is getting through to officials, and they're beginning to act on this. In the last couple of years, about 2 years ago, King Salman has taken over the reins of the kingdom, and his son Mohammed bin Salman was recently chosen as the crown prince, and this 31 or 32-year-old crown prince has introduced what he calls a Vision 2030 for Saudi Arabia, and part of his vision is to diversify the economy. And that vision is a document of, 30, 40 pages. So I'm not doing it justice by having 2 bullets on the vision. That's the point I'm trying to make. But part of the vision is to focus on renewable energy resources. And the Saudi Minister of Energy, the previous Saudi Minister of Energy, said 2 or 3 times that part of his vision is to make Saudi Arabia in a certain time frame of 20 years or 30 years from now, to make Saudi Arabia a net exporter of renewable energy. So Saudi Arabia has been investing in solar energy technology, and the water consumption and the water demands and water needs in Saudi Arabia is a huge challenge for the country, as I've been describing, and that part of the puzzle can be fixed only when they figure out the energy formula, because unless you significantly reduce energy demands for desalination, the energy needs for desalination, the water crisis will continue to accelerate. In Saudi Arabia, there is a medium-sized solar power desalination plant that is experimental. It was started about 3 or 4 years ago, and the thinking is that they want to see how it works out. They want to learn some lessons from it, and they have plans to scale it up, obviously, and they're investing, they and other governments are investing a lot of money into the exploring solar energy for desalination, how to use it. Another part of the effort is to use nuclear energy to desalinate water. Saudi Arabia is making significant steps in that direction, in the direction of developing nuclear energy. And Saudi technology uses nanofiltration membranes to eliminate scaling and fouling, increasing water production by 33% while decreasing energy usage by 30%. So there's a lot of research into the areas of reducing energy consumption in the process of desalination. And like I said, the energy piece is absolutely critical for for dealing with or resolving the water crisis. The other threat to water security in Saudi Arabia is a geopolitical one, and terrorists look for sensational targets that will get them significant coverage, and so energy infrastructure tends to be a preferred target, one of the preferred targets for these people. And if you were to bring down the energy infrastructure, you're obviously bringing down with it the water infrastructure, the water supply abilities of any country. And a Saudi official said that terrorists may target water resources and destroy desalination plants or poison rivers, pipelines, wells, and underground water. And he was the assistant minister of defense, so he's someone who was in the know. And we know for a fact that Al-Qaeda had sponsored a couple of attempts at targeting the largest oil facility in Saudi Arabia. By way of conclusion, the Nexus approach clarifies national security linkages between water, food, and energy. Reliance on fossil fuels to desalinate water is unsustainable, and this reliance is becoming more urgent as we speak, especially considering climate change and what have you. Move from food self-sufficiency to food self-reliance is far more, is a strategy that the Gulf states are beginning to adopt. In other words, when Saudi Arabia abandoned its subsidy for wheat production, essentially they changed their philosophy from one of we need to produce it at home to be food self-sufficient to we can pay to import it, right? So which is self-reliance as opposed to self-sufficiency. And incidentally, when Saudi Arabian government changed their policy on wheat, they changed their mindset and their rhetoric in terms of how they view aquifers. They began to see freshwater aquifers as more of a strategic resource, a resource for times of emergencies, because desalination plants can potentially be targets for terrorists, can be threatened by natural hazards and things like that. It's much harder to target an aquifer. So in times of emergencies, aquifers are now seen as a potential lifesaver. So risk mitigation measures for water security, risk mitigation measures should include integrated planning in the areas of water, food, and energy. And stronger governance is one measure that would be critical. Tariff reforms and what have you, and we heard about in the previous presentation by Robert about pricing water to induce conservation. Something else, especially for this audience, I would like to note the fact that I think religion can and should be brought to the fore as a tool to encourage conservation. I mean, economic signals are pretty important, and no one would argue with that. But for a lot of people, also reminding them of the fact that Christian theology, Islamic theology, Jewish theology, they encourage water conservation, they encourage creation care, they encourage preservation of the natural environment, and by using that additional tool in our toolbox of water management can be helpful, and something that I've talked about and written about. And the Gulf states are investing a lot more money in the areas of research and development into the area of desalination. That essentially is what I have to say. So I'll leave this slide up, and I welcome your questions and comments. Thank you. Yeah, there's a question in the back.
Thank you, Dr. Amery. I am just wondering, being from the Middle East, and I've been in Saudi Arabia for a while, I wonder if you can touch a little bit about Zamzam water, and you know that maybe millions of people, when they come to Saudi Arabia, they take gallons of water with them. So would you mind just elaborate on that?
And
Thank you.
Zamzam water. So I'm not a theologian, I'm a geographer. So let me try to stand corrected from the audience, from theologians in the audience. At least from an Islamic perspective, my understanding is when Prophet Ishmael was in that general region of what we call today Saudi Arabia, he went off doing something or another, and he left behind his wife, Hagar. And his wife it was very arid land, so his wife was she had a young child with her, and she needed to find a source for water, and she was searching for water between two hills, Safa and Marwa, I think, and she ended up by miracle or otherwise, ended up by stumbling on a spring that we today call Zamzam, or has since been called Zamzam. So this water has special spiritual meaning and value for Muslims, and so when they go for pilgrimage, a lot of Muslims will take with them gallons of water. Beyond that, I'm not sure that I can comment more than the following. I would like to make the following personal interpretation of the pilgrimage. Remember that the pilgrimage, Muslims' pilgrimage to Mecca is required for able Muslims. If you're able to, you're required as a Muslim to perform the pilgrimage, and this pillar of Islam is incomplete unless and until you retrace the path that Ishmael's wife Hagar did in pursuit of water. So in some respects, the pilgrimage is a commemoration of a woman's efforts and hardship in looking for water and her successful efforts in finding water. So that's a personal interpretation. I don't know what Muslim theologians would say about this. But that's...
Yeah, my point is that well, where the water came from has not been dried since like for 1400 years now, despite the fact that so many people are using it in Mecca, and it's like a major source of water, and this is like a miracle from God. The water is still coming and as if it is like new. So it is something that I would like everybody to know about it.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Yes, there's...
So
pass the microphone back to him, please. Yeah,
right.
When you're done.
Okay.
Yeah.
So thanks for this very thought-provoking lecture. You have been talking about government policy, but you did not really address politics. So Saudi Arabia, it's not a democracy. So it's the success of the government also depends on the extent to what extent they can keep the population satisfied, so that they can do through cheap energy, cheap healthcare, and cheap water. Now, if you want to reduce the amount of water, you would say, well, we're going to increase the price of water, and then people will start using less. So you would say, well, the government cannot do that because then people will not be happy with the government. To what extent do these kind of considerations influence government policy towards water?
A tricky question, and I don't know where to. Let me start by reminding all of you that the concluding remark by Robert in the lecture that preceded mine was, we need to get what is needed for water reform, water conservation, is to find the political will to act. We know what to do, we just don't have the political will to act, right? And that was one of his last statements. And essentially the same thing applies in Saudi Arabia. And what you mentioned is related to the social contract that Saudi Arabian government has with its people. So on the one hand, oil prices dropped, and that was a huge, 3 years ago, that was a huge wake-up call for the fiscally for Saudi Arabia, and they're trying to raise the price of services that they provide for the people, and they seem to be serious about this, and they're doing it gradually, which is a good thing. However, last year, about a year or a year and a half ago, the Minister of Water, who had been in his post for some time, took the issue of reducing subsidies on water to the Council of Ministers. The Council of Ministers said, absolutely, we must raise the tariff on water. So the Council of Ministers collectively agreed to this new pricing policy. So the minister applied the policy, the public screamed foul, and the minister was fired. The price was set back to roughly where it was. So it's, but the new crown prince, that Mohammed bin Salman, is determined on taking bold measures to reform Saudi society and economy. Just in the last 2-3 days, Mohammed bin Salman, the king, effectively Mohammed bin Salman, issued a decree saying that women can now drive for the first time ever in Saudi Arabia. This is for a very conservative society, this is a pretty bold move. And so in other words, what I'm saying in the area of water, I see the trend that is towards higher tariffs for water and electricity and oil prices. There's somebody in the back.
Yes, sir. When you were analyzing the Zamzam water, I felt that some things you pointed out, the relationship between Ishmael and Hagar. It's like you are saying that Ishmael married Hagar. Is it Hagar being the wife of Abraham, and Ishmael being the son of Hagar? I know that from the biblical background, the Bible will tell you that it's Abraham that married Hagar in search of a son. I know that this is a point of controversy. The issue of Ishmael is a controversy between the two Abrahamic religion, that Ishmael happens to be the son of promise when you come to Islamic religion.
The son of?
Promise. That is the right heir to the kingdom. While in the Christian tradition, Isaac becomes the child of promise. But my problem with the presentation is that, please may you clear that if Ishmael is the son of Hagar, or Ishmael is the son of Hagar, or Ishmael is Hagar is the wife of Ishmael. It's like you are saying that Hagar is the wife of Ishmael.
I preceded my comment by saying I'm not a theologian, and I was walking on very thin water in that area, so I'm sure that there are more qualified people to talk about that side of the equation, so I'll take the fifth on this. So,
Yes, thank you very much for your presentation. And this is a very basic question that demonstrates a significant amount of ignorance about the whole process of desalination, but I suspect I'm not the only person. Is the technical process of desalination, does that create pure enough water that over a sustainable period of decades it can be used for agriculture, or is it not pure enough that it would still leave enough residual that it would sort of eventually over decades trash the land? Is Saudi Arabia agricultural practices, are they considering that over a protracted period of decades, or are they sort of just looking for, like you said with the wheat, like the quick buck where they wasted their aquifers and everything like that? Is it your understanding that they're pursuing the desalination, irrigation, agriculture link sustainably?
I'm looking at Nancy. Maybe she wants to comment, but I'll say a couple of words before that. My best understanding is that desalination technology allows us to produce exactly the water that we want. It depends on how much you want to invest. It depends on how much effort you want to, how much trouble you want to get into, right? And the more effort, I mean, so you can produce highly pure water, but that comes at a higher cost, right? So the more pure the water that you want, the higher the cost associated with that. Having said this, we need to keep in mind that desalination technology, the idea of desalination, like I said, has been with us for a long time, and the fact of the matter is desalination remains a fairly expensive technology. I mean, it's not a technology for Syria, Yemen, Chad, Mali, or Somalia. It's a technology that's essentially for those who can afford it, and these are for wealthier countries. So the thinking is, at least so far, is that the desalinated water will not be used for agricultural purposes. It's just not economically feasible. Nancy and I. You can tailor your desal to your needs. Yes.
Yeah, I just wanted to underscore what you were talking about. If you look at aerial photographs of Saudi Arabia, you notice something very peculiar in that the only green spaces in the whole area are circles of green.
Yeah.
Because of the irrigation. I had never done that before, and I was just completely blown away. It looks like it's got the measles, but it's green. And it's just absolutely remarkable how there are no natural green spaces. It's either irrigated or there's no green.
I completely agree with your point. Saudi Arabia is a big place, and in the southwest corner of Saudi Arabia, close to Yemen, the terrain and the environment is radically different from much of Saudi Arabia. So Saudi Arabia, because of its land, but agriculturally speaking, I mean, all the land that is there is, the agriculture is irrigated. Incidentally, the same big circles in arid environment, I mean, you see the same flying into Denver, right? So so it's not, it's still wasteful, and at least in the context of Saudi Arabia, they don't have much precipitation, and the aquifers are non-renewable. So, yes.
Thank you for your presentation and for this helpful dialogue. One of the things you mentioned was with regard to the government realizing that the wheat subsidy in 2008 was maybe not so sustainable for their aquifers, but I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit more about where the aquifers stand today, and particularly with your background in some of the transboundary challenges that Saudi Arabia faces, perhaps looking at the DC aquifer between Saudi Arabia and Jordan, or the shared resources on the borders.
So the aquifers in Saudi Arabia are poorly understood. We don't have good data on those. In fact, I have a project now looking into that area, and I'm having a hard time finding reasonable data. So that area is mysterious and is calling for additional research. So that in terms of the DC aquifer, that is an aquifer in the northwest corner of Saudi Arabia. It's an aquifer that is jointly owned by Saudi Arabia and Jordan. And the Saudi Arabian government has excellent relationship with the Jordanian government. And as a result of this, they have allowed, in recent years, they've allowed the Jordanian government to tap into it, and Jordan has built a pipeline that draws water from way down south in the Jordanian kingdom all the way to Amman at a significant cost, again, primarily because of water scarcity. as a footnote of history, as a by the way kind of thing, and I don't have a good enough map to sort of show you here, but if you think of that corner that I'm talking about, the northwest corner close to the Gulf of Aqaba, there was in fact a territorial exchange between Jordan and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia a few decades ago that would allow Jordan a little bit more access to the Gulf of Aqaba, to the Red Sea, and as a result of this territorial exchange, Jordan significantly expanded, at that time unknown to anyone, significantly expanded its ownership of the DC aquifer. So by taking that additional bit of land, they've captured significant amounts of water underground. There's a hand at the back.
I'm just curious about the, after the process of desalination of the water, what happens to the salt that's extracted? Are there uses? Is it, what's the consequence of?
The consequence is some of it is dumped in the desert, some of it is dumped in the sea, and by dumping it back in the sea, you're changing the salinity and the ecological conditions of the water, impacting the environment. So that's essentially what.
And could it possibly, the water that's dumped back into, become similar to a Dead Sea situation?
The salinity of the Gulf has definitely been increasing. We know that for a fact. Now I'm talking about the entire Gulf. And that's partly a result of the desalination process, but also partly a result of into here, what is, we don't have a nice blue line, but basically this is Shatt al-Arab, which is the confluence of the Euphrates and the Tigris. The Euphrates and the Tigris, they come together into the Shatt al-Arab, and this freshwater river pours into the Gulf. And this river, the Tigris and Euphrates, is being very, very heavily dammed by the three riparian states, Turkey, Syria, and Iraq. And as a result of this, a lot less water is reaching the Gulf. So that is adding to the salinity of this water body. Not to mention climate change and things like that. There was one of the triggers of the Syrian war, has to do with the extensive drought that hit Syria, Lebanon, and Iraq from 2006 till 2011. And that reduced, again, the flow in the Tigris and Euphrates, affecting the salinity of the Gulf.
Are there uses, though, for that salt? I mean, we use salt for our roads, and
I don't, probably, but I'm not aware of any.
There's building, you can build with salt, and there's a whole project going on that I was thinking the same thing, and I was wondering, and apparently there is a salt building project. You can make a brick out of salt as a basic element, and apparently that's one of the hoped for UN uses of desalinization. I just happened to read about that.
Other questions?
You mentioned the fact that they're going to be requiring more and more energy, and it, by 2025 it may impact the amount of oil for export. Do we see a point in the let's say by 2050 or so, I realize it's difficult to determine this, that they may require sufficient portion of their oil that may impact world energy markets, and in other words, could have turmoil way beyond Saudi Arabia?
Let me answer the question as best as I heard it. And so Saudi Arabia is forecast, with business as usual scenario, not to be able to export any oil in about 15 or 20 years, relatively soon. And that is one of the major drivers for Saudi Arabia's interest in nuclear energy. right? Because they want to, and in renewables, right? And so basically they want to, their thinking is they want to be able to use nuclear and renewables domestically, so to allow them to continue exporting oil to the world. Is that what you're asking?
If they're not successful in bringing on nuclear, if they're not successful to the degree that they wish to bring on nuclear or renewable, that is there, and I realize it's difficult to say, is there a significant risk it could impact their exports at that point?
Absolutely. I mean, completely. And the big question is, facing Saudi Arabia is, they're in desperate need for economic diversification, for moving away from oil. Having said this, Saudi Arabia has been talking about economic diversification for a long, long time, and the fact of the matter is they haven't done a whole lot about it. But this is a different Saudi Arabia today than it was in the past. We are talking about rapidly growing population. Saudi Arabia has a population of 30 million. For the Gulf states, that's quite significant. That's a fairly high population size. And so they need to do something desperately. And one of the questions earlier about subsidies and the lifting of subsidies and how they may affect political stability, this is the kind of related to your question, because that is the long-standing concern, is that if we lift subsidies, if we, the government of Saudi Arabia, were to lift subsidies, how will the people respond? Will they take to the streets? Will they accuse us of breaching this long-standing social contract? We take care of you, and you buy into our political system, basically buy into our political system, you mind your own business, and you don't interfere in politics. So as the economic picture changes, I would argue that Saudi Arabia is left with no choice but to give citizens a lot more voice in their future, and more voice would bring uncertainties.
Thank you very much for this presentation and interesting discussion. I have a comment, and I'm very interested in any insight that you can lend. And forgive me, I'm from the social sciences, so my understanding is naive.
I'm a social scientist too.
A couple of years ago, my comment relates to the commodification of water. A couple of years ago, I was listening to a program on National Public Radio, and they were talking about one of the states in the southwestern part of the U.S. I can't remember if it was Arizona or New Mexico, but Saudi Arabia had purchased land in order to be able to grow wheat. I believe it was wheat. It was a grain. I think it was wheat. It actually was affecting the local aquifers and having a negative impact on the ability of local farmers to be able to grow their produce. But Saudi Arabia has the economic means to be able to do that. There's not enough water there, but they were able to grow where there was water available. In contrast, a couple of years ago, actually at the time we did this first conference, I was doing some work in a country in southern Africa, and there was no water. There was no tap water. We couldn't take a shower. Spoiled American, I couldn't find bottled water anywhere. It was kind of scary. But an African nation that would not have the ability to go halfway around the globe to purchase land where there is water, you get my point. So this notion, I just get really concerned about this notion of commodification of such a precious resource as water, and how that contributes to the already burgeoning have-not kind of division. So any insight
I've spoken critically about Saudi Arabia's subsidy of wheat today and in the past. And so it seems to me when Saudi Arabia goes beyond their borders to areas that are more endowed in water resources, can produce food more, under better ecological conditions, it seems the rule of thumb is, and I'm deliberately using that phrase, the rule of thumb is, I don't think they should be criticized. And now, it's the example that you gave, I'm aware of, and it seems to me it's an American problem of subsidizing water. I mean, if water is priced appropriately in America, then probably Saudi Arabia would look elsewhere. And because they probably found it, I didn't study the economics of the arrangement that they have in Arizona, but they found it, economically feasible, so they did it. And it's probably, and why not? I mean, so the more questionable deals are when China, Saudi Arabia, and other governments go to, shady authoritarian governments like that of Sudan, and they make land deals with them where we don't really know, or Ethiopia, we don't know what they paid, how much they paid, and what are the social, economic consequences of these deals. In America, deals are transparent, and so Saudi Arabia, they, like I said earlier, they did what they did in terms of reversal of their wheat policy, but so what happened is to the wheat farmers, they actually went into the production, they focused their efforts on production of alfalfa, because alfalfa was not covered in the phase out of the subsidies. And alfalfa requires a lot more animal feed. Alfalfa requires a lot more water to produce than wheat. So it took them, 2-3 years or 5 years later, the Saudi Arabian government included or added alfalfa to the no subsidy policy. And so what Saudi Arabia did with Arizona, I believe they are importing alfalfa, animal feed, from Arizona and from Argentina and from Venezuela, because they want to, because they believe in having enough dairy products for Saudi Arabia. In fact, Saudi Arabia's massive corporation called Amery is a net exporter of dairy products to the entire Gulf. So Holstein cows that live in air-conditioned environments, seriously, produce a lot of milk. Nancy.
I have a question I'm going to ask. It's a little on the engineering side, but just curious. As I was looking at the pictures and thinking about the region, so I'm thinking about evaporation. So a lot of the arid regions, if you look at the water balance, and there's more evaporation, a substantial amount of water is evaporated. And so when I look at the image of how they're taking water, desal, and then using it for irrigation, the manner with which they're irrigating may be quite vulnerable to evaporation, so losing a large fraction of that high energy produced water, sending it right back into the atmosphere. Do you know if they have the means to invest in high-tech ag practices that keep the water in the soil and evaporates less? Do you know if that's happening, so that at least more of the water that is being produced can go into the crop? And then I also think about recharge. You're worrying about your aquifer, you try to direct some back into recharge, and I'll just mention this for those who want to look up innovative and interesting water reuse strategies. There's a project called SWIFT that you can Google, SWIFT, Virginia, and it's actually in the Norfolk area. It's Hampton Roads Sanitation District. It's probably one of the most innovative prospects or projects in water reuse going on right now, where they're actually recharging an aquifer that has about 100-year age before that water comes back out, but in the process of doing the recharge, they're reversing subsidence, which was a problem by holding in storm water, which was corroding infrastructure because it's salt water. And so they're fixing a lot of problems by taking wastewater effluent, treating it to the level needed for recharge, and then pull it back out 100 years from now to secure the drinking water source. And so I'm thinking that there are innovative solutions in recharge here, and I don't know if they're doing it. So a couple questions are.
So some of the recharge, water demand, water needs are much higher in the summer than in the winter. Desalination outputs are the same throughout the year. So what they do in the Gulf and elsewhere, in fact, is that they use some of the surplus output in the wintertime to recharge some of the aquifers. So that is something that has been taking place. And in terms of reducing evaporation from irrigation, in the irrigation process, I don't know that there's anything that is that's applied at mass scale. I know that at least a couple of corporations in the U.S. have ideas in terms of adding substances to the soil so to reduce irrigation. They were trying to market these substances, these additives, to at least the Qatari government, to the best of my knowledge. And I don't know if they've been successful or not, but there are definitely efforts to try and reduce evaporation. The Qatari government has been hypersensitive to its food insecurity because the vast majority of something like 88% of its food comes from abroad, and the recent Saudi-Qatari tensions have highlighted Qatar's food insecurity because Qatar's only land border is with Saudi Arabia, and that land border was blocked in June of this year, which complicated Qatar's food imports quite a bit. I'll be in Qatar, Georgetown University in Qatar next month, talking about water and politics in the Middle East, and I'll be flying from Qatar to Beirut to see my 92-year-old father in Lebanon, and the flight from Qatar to Beirut will take an hour and 45 minutes extra because the Qatari airline, they have to basically cannot fly over the Saudi airspace. They have to go over Iran and basically take a long detour to get to Lebanon because of the current tensions. And Qatar is trying to be food self-sufficient, and they're investing a lot of money in the science and technology to create soil and to make sandy conditions, amenable to food production. And they haven't, to my knowledge, made any significant successes yet, but they're serious about trying to produce as much food as they can. And they're not thinking about wheat. They're thinking more about, chickens. They're thinking more about, food self-sufficient in green peppers, in onions, in certain vegetables, certain food crops, but not the cheaper ones like wheat and barley. There's a question there.
Thank you for your presentation. It was very informative. So my question is on, you mentioned something about, the 2030 vision. So my question is on agriculture. Kind of looking at, so with this 30-page document that you were talking about, does it include anything on sustainable agriculture? Because I think when, looking at, if they are saying we want to change the way we have been doing things, and you also mentioned that agriculture is also one of the biggest, it uses a lot of water in Saudi Arabia. So I was just curious to know if they have anything in their, that 2030 vision about maybe sustainable agriculture.
Today I've tried to focus more on Saudi Arabia. My book and research has been focused on the Gulf states as a whole. In the Gulf states, including Saudi Arabia, sustainability is something that they have been taking very seriously. They have all kinds of documents and conferences on sustainability, and they're trying to make significant progress in that area. They know that their ecological footprint is significant and unsustainable, and they have to do something about it. So the Vision 2030 definitely has goals for sustainability in the kingdom. So that is
like I said earlier about economic diversification,
not sustainability per se, is something that Saudi Arabia has been talking about for 30, 40 years. And not a whole lot has happened. So, I wish we can have a discussion 10 years from now where we sort of say, how are they doing on sustainability? But definitely in terms of the public rhetoric, in terms of what they're teaching in the classroom, is changing. So what the media is saying is changing. They're talking about sustainability, conservation, efficiency. So the public rhetoric, the conversation is changing in Saudi Arabia and the Gulf. And I think that's a very hopeful sign. I can make the following public confession. Some 15 years ago, I was teaching an environmental class, and to make a long story short, I told my students that although I know that recycling is good, but I don't do it, and I should, but I don't. And so it's that behavioral modification side of the equation I think is important. That's probably an area where spirituality and religion can come into play as well, can help. And what pushed me over the edge to embrace recycling was when my kids became a little bit older, right? What they were learning in schools and their own outlook on life was different than mine. And we've been recycling for 8 or 10 years, and so there's hope. Thank you for the questions. I enjoyed the dialogue, and I love the idea of the conference.
Thank you very much, Professor Amery. What a wonderful presentation and a delightful conversation. Thank you for that art of engaging each other in such constructive dialogue. Now, as we're waiting for lunch, it's going to be ready just in a short time. I'm going to invite two speakers to come up briefly, just for a moment or two. These are some of our presenters next door. Cynthia, if you would come and say a little bit about your display next door, just for a few moments. And then we'll have Potter's Water Action Group representative speaking, Mr. Wukich. So, Cynthia, would you begin?
Hello, I'm Cynthia Walter from St. Vincent College, just a little east of here. The St. Francis has asked us to hear the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor. And I think we all feel that very much in this room. And I'm inviting you all to, when you go back to your institutions, to think about the vast numbers of underserved individuals who need water testing in their homes. And the inability of experts to do that water testing. We've now reached the point where the technology of simple water tests can be reliably performed by students when trained by you and your colleagues to go out into people's homes, especially those of the poor and rural areas, to test water and then give that preliminary survey evidence to the experts who then can act to talk to officials and work on water quality problems and make those innovations. So I have a poster associated with that where my colleagues and I have been working in Guatemala, Lesotho, Africa, and rural Pennsylvania, where water quality and contamination is still a problem, even here. So please stop by at my poster, but also think about going home and talking about to your folks to do water quality testing in underserved communities in your regions. Thank you.
Thank you, Cynthia. And Mr. Wukich, would you like to come and say a little bit? Now, this is a very interesting display. We've got the traditional poster, and then we've got a potter coming to speak to us. Just go back to behind the screen. And the little pottery piece is outside. It's not actually inside, but it's next door and then on the balcony. And there'll be a little display there over lunch. Mr. Wukich.
Thanks, Jerry. Thanks, Dr. John. I got to talk about this theological question. I'm talking about back there. Years ago, right after this, just a few months after this war started, the war in Iraq, I had the opportunity to go to Iraq and work with some head makers. We're going to work on this water filter project. So we flew into Amman, Jordan, and at that time we could take a car, an SUV, all the way across the desert from Amman, Jordan into Baghdad. Then I had an opportunity to go from Baghdad down south, and I was very close to Abraham's birthplace of Ur. And then I returned back to Baghdad, did my work. We went all the way back to Amman, Jordan by car, and then I decided I'm so close to the Holy Land, I got to go to the Holy Land. So I go into the Holy Land across the River Jordan, and of course I always love to go to Bethlehem. Next door to Bethlehem is Bet Sahur, and you know Bet Sahur is where Rachel's tomb is located. See? And I thought to myself after I got there, I said, wow, do you understand what I did? I traced the steps of Jacob going back to Ur, and then back to Bethlehem where they lived. And boy, you know what I did? I took me a big drink of water. See? And I imagined that when Jacob got to Ur, he took a big drink of water. So anyhow, that's my theological story. I'm baptized Serbian Orthodox and Greek Catholic, by the way. So, and one other thing about my credentials, I'm a farmer. This is my costume, all right? I have a big farm up in Slippery Rock, and what we do, we make water filters out of clay and sawdust. I started doing this in Nicaragua after Hurricane Mitch with Ron Rivera of Potters for Peace, and we've built these water filter plants all over the world. It's a very, very simple technology. We take clay and sawdust, sift it very fine, mix them together, mix it with water, press it in a filter press. We have a hydraulic filter press, and dry that pot out, fire the pot, the sawdust burns away. We test the filter, the flow of the filter, then we treat that with a just a very small percentage of silver, colloidal silver. Our filters filter out 99.9% of the bacteria and the parasites in the water. The filters cost, I just got a quote from one of our plants in Sabana Grande, Honduras, to ship to Puerto Rico. The filters there cost $28. We have a filter factory that we built several years ago in Nigeria, in Osun State, Nigeria. They can make their filters for about $9 a pop. So I'm here to demonstrate how to press these filters, but I need some helpers to like help me sift the clay and all that stuff. I usually bring a group of students, but I'm kind of flying solo today. So thank you very much for this conference. Thank you very much for the opportunity to talk about Rachel's tomb.
Okay, so we can all reward ourselves now with some nice water over lunch. Just go out, it's a buffet lunch, help yourself and bring lunch back through. We have a good 35, 40 minutes to have a quiet, gentle lunch. Enjoy and be sustained. Thank you.